Doom the Dark Ages officially got its release date along with the massive flood of information over the last few days. From PC specs, the omission of multiplayer, some gameplay for people to chew over, and with the exposure of the gameplay, we were given insight into the design philosophy and execution strategy behind this game. It's quite a lot, especially considering the last little bit of information we got was 7 months ago, when the game was teased for the first time. At that time, I think it's easy to say the premise was captivating by itself. The Dark Ages historically refers to a period where there was a perception that cultural advancement was halted. There was a lack of historical records being kept, and of course, there was a lot of bloodshed due to the constant warfare attributed to the power vacuum that arose in the wake of the collapse of the Holy Roman Empire. For some, the idea of the Dark Ages also has a religious undertone, and since Doom is the most religious game of all time, it was a perfect match. And the Doomslayer was here, front and center, completely remodeled, more badass than ever, serving as the super weapon of gods and kings, using crushed skulls as ammunitions to chop demons to pieces, or pin them to walls with blessed stakes. Most interesting was the introduction of a shield. When that was thrown to slice demons in half, immediately boomerang back and can be used to parry and block. Now the guns themselves was badass. It seemed to fit very perfectly within the vein of not only Doom but the whole Dark Ages medieval times concept. The shield was entirely new, a little questionable, which we'll talk about in a second, but it was the introduction of the dragon and the mech where something immediately clicked. And that was ultimately, this game has been something that Hugo Marin, the game director over at id Software, has been talking about openly for quite some time, in many different ways, not just talking about the dragon or even mech, but speaking about what was next for Doom in contrast to Doom Eternal. And let this channel become more stale than a sexless 40-year-old marriage, so I kind of whimpered off, but as an introduction to myself and my content surrounding Doom in the past, I would say no one really healthily vetted the games like I did. Of course, the quote-unquote complaint of Eternal being too bright, colorful, and cartoonish in contrast to 2016 was a very stupid complaint, but it did serve two major functions. On the one hand, it was gameplay. You needed those demons and resources to visually stand out so you could quickly identify your surroundings, move, and prioritize your movement and enemy targeting accordingly. When I got the pleasure of speaking to Hugo back in 2021, he also mentioned that the gameplay element lent itself to an aspect of homage. The more they upped the colors to allow the player to see what the hell was going on, the more they designed their demons and resources such as health vials and keycards in a way that was very reminiscent of Doom 1993. Doom is an entire brand, meaning every single game ever released, all complemented the overall brand very beautifully while having unique variations in gameplay, visual design, overall approach, and I even see that within Doom the Dark Ages, with a mixture of homage and some brand new stuff. Where Eternal, the homage was in the demon design and the keycards. So far, I immediately see the Dark Ages in the HUD. A little bit in the demon design as well, definitely in the gameplay itself, with, as they're claiming it, return to form. A higher emphasis on dodging projectiles, and may even lend itself to a high skill ceiling of its own design. So far, I'm feeling it most in the HUD with the Doomslayer's face front and center. Obviously, it's much more modernized, but even then, it still has its own style and overall design to it, at least in terms of the original Doom games. But I would even say they're paying a little bit of homage to the newer Doom games as well, saying that this game leads directly into the Doom 2016 Slayer Testaments. Full transparency, Doom 2016 wasn't something I played as much as Eternal. I love the game, but it dropped my interest after a run or two. However, the Testaments, along with what we've seen in the gameplay reveal, I do believe Hugo and Marty when they say that this is going to be the most ambitious game they've made to date. And I think much of that not only comes from the expansion of things that are already there, such as explorable areas, secrets, and these bigger battlefields that seems like they're going to be exploring more in the Dark Ages, but in the newness of the mech, the dragon, and the melee combat system. The melee combat system itself is something that's quite interesting to me because it doesn't seem like something that was ever properly tested in the past. You know, the two melee weapons that immediately come to my mind in terms of Doom is the Crucible and the Hammer. The Hammer was, of course, in the Ancient Gods Part 2, and that was more of a complement to the core gameplay loop. It helped with resource management as well as prioritizing heavy demons and crowds as well. There was no direct hit. All you had to do was hit the floor and anything around you immediately got dazed. It gave you some ammunition back and you can take advantage of the lull in the combat, sort of speak. And then there was a Crucible where it was essentially a super weapon. You can use it one time and you'd slice a demon in half like a knife cutting through butter. It served its purpose effectively, but it ultimately was a strategic weapon used to wipe out a dangerous target that over time, experienced players just phased out of their arsenal entirely. And when you used it, it essentially locked you in place and initiated an animation. Now with the shield having a parry system and a few melee weapons, such as a flail, a spiked mace, and an electrified gauntlet, we're going from weapons that complemented the gunplay to multiple melee weapons becoming a fundamental part within the gameplay loop itself. If Eternal in 2016 has proven anything, it's that id has taken into great consideration all of the data and proper feedback from both games, understand where their priorities lay, and of course, every tool placed within our hands will have a place and purpose within the overall philosophy of Doom the Dark Ages, as well as the overarching theme of Doom as a brand. I do have my trust within the team, but for a consumer standpoint, it still is a little bit of uncharted territory, and just how you require to personally experience a game for yourself to determine whether if it's good or bad. I think the melee system is going to be in a very similar wheelhouse. The same could be said for the mech and dragon aspects, but I think those will be sections that lend themselves to a host of different mechanics and avenues of gameplay, with my biggest concern already actually being addressed. That was the dragon and mech being gimmicks. Just one and done bullet points to mention during the trailer that ultimately have no place in a continual play space. But not only did Hugo specifically combat that point in the Xbox Direct trailer, there's even a round of cosmetics for the mech and dragon named the Divinity Pack. Now if they follow the quote-unquote roadmap of Doom Eternal, there should be more cosmetics down the way for not only the Doomslayer himself, but possibly the dragon and the mech. But with the dragon and mech having a cosmetic option from the jump, leads me to believe they really will have a dedicated chunk of playtime and significance lent to them. Which leads me to one final thing: pressure in getting it right. Listen, the gaming landscape is entirely different from now versus what it was back in 2020 to 2021. One, COVID itself is no longer a factor. There's no working from home or remotely, which was a huge clog in the updates and content department back then. id is a small, loving family of developers, and the community itself was very understanding. All things considered, I even think by the end of Eternal, while there were definitely challenges in place affecting productivity and expediency in delivering fixes for bugs and issues that critically affected the gameplay, while what they achieved was applaudable, it was still somewhat at a snail's pace. But the pressure is now doubled due to the other factor. ZeniMax is owned by Microsoft now, which means on day one, Doom the Dark Ages is immediately hitting Game Pass, putting the game in front of a much larger audience than ever before, at least in terms of accessibility. Now, it could ultimately just be nothing, and me having a little bit of PTSD and just remembering constantly waiting for a new content drop or some information on the DLC or a patch for the no target bug in Doom Eternal, and constantly getting stuck on the geometry, and if anything was going to be fixed in terms of that. It's just one of those things that immediately stuck out to me, and considering we have an entirely melee-based combat system with the introduction of the dragon and the mech and so much new innovations into the Doom brand, it was one of those things that clicked as something that was both exciting but a little bit concerning in terms of, because of the game having such a massive exposure and the lack of a, let's say, compassionate understanding on why there was such a slow drip in content. Regardless of a little bit of apprehension and curiosity, I'm definitely excited. This is actually the first game I ever went out and bought the collector's edition for, so an official congratulations to Hugo Marin, Marty Stratton, and the entire team at id Software, and I look forward to Doom the Dark Ages come May 15th.